Support for this episode is provided by Circle, a platform built for the busy internal communicator. Circle saves you an average of 46 hours a month through drag-and-drop email that looks beautiful on all devices, real-time actionable engagement metrics, and a variety of features built with internal communications in mind. Visit circle.com, that's CERKL.com, to discover how to evaluate and simplify your internal communications.
I'm Sarah Jackson. Welcome to Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. I'm on the road this season to talk to the experts that can help internal communicators face their biggest challenges. The time has come to raise the internal knowing of the value that lies within.
Really don't underestimate the value you bring as an internal communicator to shape and change kind of the way that the organization works and actually drives its profitability. Exactly, and I think that's the biggest part that kind of our internal communicators maybe don't understand the impact of their work. And I don't mean that from a standpoint, I just think sometimes we can think, oh, we're back office, so therefore we don't add value. We're a cost center, and that's an old kind of trite narrative, right? And hopefully that's dying out a bit. So I think one of the easiest ways to do that is first and foremost for the internal communicator to be thinking about, okay, what is the real value that I'm bringing to the business in this solution, right?
Chief Financial Officers. Traditionally, we see them as holding the keys to the financial kingdom. However, internal communicators have something in common with CFOs. In recent years, both our roles have evolved significantly. Traditionally being viewed as a financial gatekeeper, the role of the CFO has expanded and evolved to an advisor and a strategic partner to the CEO. So I wondered if I could crack open the door to a CFO's office who would help me uncover insights from this evolution, as the internal comms industry seems to be trending in the same direction. So I reached out to Jay Shelton, the CFO for Holland Corporation. He also teaches finance at our local university, and he helped me demystify the office of the CFO. This and much more on today's show. Okay, hi, this is Sarah Jackson, your host of the Internal Comms Pro podcast. I made it into the CFO's office. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Great. My name is Jay Shelton. I'm CFO of Holland Corporation. We're restaurant management and a real estate development firm located here in Taylor Mill, Kentucky. We have about 1,000 employees across 3 different states. But beyond that, I've also had experience as a CFO at banks, had experience as a controller at manufacturing companies, all the way to marketing and research firms. So hopefully it's a broad section of experience that can give you a little bit of insight as to what your finance team is thinking when they are reviewing kind of project proposals.
Well, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, because you had been a CFO at so many different types of organizations. Mm-hmm. But for those folks who are from Cincinnati, Holland Group, I don't know if you realize this, is one of the largest, if not the largest. Do
Skyline
I have this right?
franchisees. Yes, absolutely.
That's right. So downstairs, and we're going to walk around and show you this beautiful building, but there's a Skyline Chili. So now I'm like all salivating to get a 3-way and a Coney. And there's a Grater's ice cream here.
Correct.
And there's a La Rosa's.
Yes.
So this is called the Trifecta building.
The Trifecta building. It's the only place in Cincinnati where you get all 3 concepts together. So we're pretty proud of that too.
So look on the blog. We'll show you pictures of it. All right. So I wanted to talk to you because last year we did this huge series called the Rise and Shine series. And we went all over the country, and I moderated panels. And these panels had internal communication professionals that would impart their knowledge and their wisdom to all the attendees. Yeah. And one thing that happened at every event that I had was there was a question that was always asked. And it was the number one question that everybody was most hungry for. And the question was, how do we show the ROI of our work?
Yeah, it's really interesting in the fact that a lot of the support departments sometimes can get the mistaken impression that their work can't be quantified, right? They're really good about qualitative factors, right? The things employee engagement or customer satisfaction. But one of the things that maybe sometimes they feel a little bit uncertain about is how do I quantify it, right? And when we think about the budgetary approval process and other things, oftentimes those are going to be quantitative measures. So I think one of the easiest ways to do that is first and foremost for the internal communicator to be thinking about, okay, what is the real value that I'm bringing to the business in this solution, right? So am I talking about getting more of our employees on the same page? Okay, is there a productivity improvement on there? Or is there a employee satisfaction component to there that'll reduce turnover? So there's a lot of different ways that we can kind of turn a qualitative measurement into a quantitative measurement by just kind of breaking down what that value proposition is that the internal communicator is trying to bring to the table. Okay. So that's at least maybe one of the things I think you think of. And hopefully maybe in this discussion, first and foremost, we're going to be able to at least demystify the finance group. We're really just normal people. I promise you're not in the Death Star, right?
I was sweating and nervous. I put my suit on.
Exactly.
I was nervous actually coming here.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay to say. Yeah. I'll be vulnerable with our audience because it is, on the third floor and the C-suite. And so I think there is some nervousness and uncertainty. So I do appreciate you opening your door so that we can just ask some of the questions. And we have, in our audience, we have senior VPs listening. We have more junior level folks listening. So if we could start kind of high level and then really dive into the weeds, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So let's just start right out of the gate. How do you define ROI?
Yeah. So ROI is just a simple financial measurement, right? If we think about it, it's really the difference between, hey, what was my beginning investment, right? So kind of cash outlay for whatever the project is that we're thinking. And then ultimately, if I think about all the positive impact that I generate from a monetary standpoint, I add up all those and I'm really comparing what the end positive values from that investment are versus the initial beginning investment. So it's really, if we just think about, let's just say that we have a $100,000 investment into a new employee intranet, right? And then we say, though, on the counter on that is, but we believe that we can get $25,000 of annual savings over the next 5-year period through either employee satisfaction or productivity, whatever that measurement happens to be. We would add up those positive values, and in this case it would be $125,000. All we would do is say $125,000 minus $100,000 initial investment. That's $25,000 net return, right?
Okay.
And then we just divide that by the initial investment of $100,000. So we would say there's a 25% ROI, return on our investment. So that's just a really simple. It's just all the good guys minus the bad guy of the investment divided by the initial investment. So hopefully that kind of demystifies that. And when we think about it, oftentimes people will hear the term ROI or they hear the term return or any of that. And what we really want to be thinking in terms of is, okay, does the positive benefits from my initial investment outweigh my initial investment? Then I know I have a positive return.
Okay, so how do I know that? So ROI is communicated as a percentage?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
it's always a percentage.
It doesn't always have to be, though. It can be as a raw dollar. What's the return on this investment? $25,000 net over the period in which we invested it. Okay, great.
Okay.
Or it can be 25%. Most of the time it's going to be a percentage. And the reason for that is so that finance can compare similar projects across a spectrum and they can kind of benchmark each one of those. So one project may have a 25% return, the other one may have a 10% return. As we're trying to kind of allocate scarce resources, what we have to do is start to prioritize those projects that have maybe a bigger return relative to the amounts that we're investing. So that's one of the reasons why we do that as a percentage, just because we can be thinking through the idea of, okay, well, how do I compare two completely different projects? Well, I can if I right size those by a percentage.
Okay, so comparing apples to apples.
You got it.
And making it easy for you to do that.
Making it easy, yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully we've also made it easy for the person, the internal communications expert to be able to say, okay, I don't have to have a CPA or a CMA in order to do this, right? Some PhD in quant analytics. So in essence, what I can do is hopefully, round it to the large numbers and then really kind of quantify what the net benefits are. And then I'm really comparing it to what was the initial investment that I asked the company to make on it. So
okay, so I'm not sweating as badly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because I was nervous.
Yeah, I took off my Darth Vader helmet. It's Casual Friday, so I don't really use it on there. Yeah, and hopefully the other thing I do want to kind of demystify in this discussion is in finance, maybe the days of the old big long table and somebody pounding the table, hopefully those are dying out, because really our finance team wants to work collaboratively across the spectrum of, between operations, between marketing and HR and all the other facets that really kind of bring value to the company.
Okay, IC pros, you still with me? This was the point of the interview where I started to breathe a little easier. The morning I recorded this, there was a snow day. My kids were stuck at home. I had to scrape off my car in the dark. I was hoofing it up to the third floor in heels and a suit. But to my surprise, I found that CFOs were not intimidating at all. And this CFO loved talking about numbers. Let's continue to listen as I dive deeper into the real challenge of your CFO and why it might feel like they're always saying no.
The challenge where finance really kind of struggles is the idea that we have an infinite amount of opportunity throughout any company that I've ever been in, right? But we also have a finite amount of resources that we have to do, so have to allocate. So we're always trying to make those trade-offs between the infinite opportunities that a company may have, but also the very finite resources that we have in the near term. So that's, if you ever wonder why sometimes like finance and accounting seems like we always say no, it's just we're trying to juggle between, the opportunities that are in front of the company and also the finite resources that a company has at any point in time.
So let's keep going with that point. So what pressure do CFOs face? Give me from their perspective, what are they thinking and feeling?
So if we just think about the CFO role as well as just the finance role in general, right? First and foremost, we're stewards of the company's assets, right? And if you just think about it, that's really everything from fixed assets, the buildings and the equipment that we all kind of interact with, all the way to the monetary assets, bank accounts and other things. So we first and foremost have to be stewards in order so that the lifeblood of the company can continue going in the short and also in the long term. So we kind of take that role as number one. But then closely right behind that, we really have to be good reporters of the facts of the financial health and well-being of the company, right? We need to make sure that they're accurate as well as timely. So those are a couple of things that we really try to just be kind of arbiters of the truth, just making sure that, hey, look, this is the health and fitness of the company at any particular time, and we're able to articulate that. So it'll look different at different companies. Publicly traded companies may look different, in their reporting structure than privately held. But in general, those are the two things that we're always operating in. And then at the very close behind is, how do we then partner with kind of the strategic goals of the company to make sure that, okay, forward thinking, are we putting the company in the very best position that we can in order to kind of align future growth opportunities, as well as also make sure that we still have the resources to maintain kind of original commitments and other things that we already allocated from the business standpoint. So that's really just the struggle, is both providing for the here and now, but also being able to provide kind of the future outlook and the strategic direction, the financial resources to power that. So whenever you're kind of wondering that kind of struggle that a CFO is in, it's really kind of juggling the here and the now, safety, soundness, security of the company, as well as, providing for the operational capital and the strategic funding that allows the company to kind of grow and prosper.
So did y'all hear that? When talking to your CFO, words and feelings that resonate with them are accuracy, timeliness, safety, and security. I pushed a little harder here to really dive into what keeps a CFO up at night.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that always kind of keeps us up is what they say, the unknown unknowns, right? Which are, okay, we understand the risks that are in front of us, but what are those kind of, out on the edge of the frontier risks that we haven't yet encountered, right? When we think about, okay, hey, let's call it disruption from mobile applications all the way to social media and things. So it really, and it's different for each company, but it really comes back to, okay, we can quantify a certain set of risks that are in front of us that we're used to kind of operating within. But the other side is too, if we've only kind of positioned the company to withstand the risks that are right in front of us, then we really will be one of those kind of organizations that won't be able to withstand kind of an outside negative environment that we didn't anticipate, right? So the real thought on the CFO is, can I create a strong enough financial base to where we can both handle the risks that are right in front of us, as well as the making the most of the opportunities that, we're looking out forward in the future. But on the flip side is, hey, can we withstand something that we didn't see coming, right?
Okay.
Are we broad enough in our depth of, as far as financial assets, also our operating assets, that we then can withstand maybe something that we didn't see coming, or make the most of an opportunity that we didn't see on our horizon 12, 18 months ago. So that's really kind of the thought is, we're juggling between, the operational excellence and safety and soundness of the organization right here and now, and then also positioning us for, future strategic growth and strength in the future.
So, all right. So I'm the internal communicator here at One Holland Group.
Yeah.
I'm just pretending,
Yeah.
hypothetical. And it's my first day on the job. And
you're getting to sample all the great food.
I know.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm full.
Yes,
of
exactly.
My 3-way and my coney.
And a little ice cream. Yeah.
Black raspberry chip.
Right,
What's your
go.
favorite?
Yeah. That, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting my plan together. And of course, there's all these things that I want to do.
Yeah.
But before I come in here and say, I feel like we should be, I'm just, again, making this up, firing up a new intranet.
Yeah.
Is there a step before that that would help me develop a relationship with you and your team? Is there broader questions I should come in and ask? Like, should I ask about the company's growth goals? Like, what should I know that would have you perceive me as, like that's the first right step? What are those first questions?
Yeah.
And then we're going to, again, dive deeper into, okay, when I do want to get a project approved,
Exactly.
what do I do? But before that, is there a step that we sometimes miss and that it would be perceived better or enhance our professional credibility better? Like, coach me a little bit on that.
Well, I think the first time that you interact with the finance department, right? First and foremost, you should know that we're not like in a dungeon like a Dilbert cartoon where we're not trolls or anything. But the other part is too, maybe make sure that the first time you're interacting doesn't have to be when you're trying to actually get a project through, because ultimately getting some of those interpersonal inroads developed long before actually clues you in twofold. Number one, you know who does what within there, right? Because finance is going to be broken out into, some people may have an expertise over HR and payroll, while the other folks may have an expertise on payables and vendor relationships and things like that. And you may even have some people geared towards maybe external reporting and the overall financial reporting. So you really want to be able to kind of figure out, okay, hey, who does what in the finance? You don't have to be an expert in the org chart, but kind of understanding and having some kind of a interpersonal level communication with the main players in finance just helps you kind of know and understand and be in the loop of some of the financial discussions that are having. So like in a publicly traded company, you'll start to hear things like, okay, hey, look, they did really good this past quarter. They beat expectations, and you'll have an understanding, they feel really good about the growth goals. So that'll give you a really good paint a good picture of an idea of, okay, we're in kind of an expansion time period. This may be a really good spot for us to kind of think about adding that intranet, because we're adding, we just merged with somebody, and that communications between multiple organizations now all of a sudden become much more important. Those are those little bitty tidbits that you won't see. Somebody won't come over and say, I need this right now, but instead you'll start to pick up some of the nuance on the discussions that are happening naturally in finance, that then you can go back to your individual departments and say, okay, hey, look, that's what I understand. Or you may also hear, oh my gosh, it was a tough quarter for them, or this year's budget is really being stressed, so therefore, cost cutting and other measures. It doesn't mean that your project doesn't fit. It could also mean, hey, look, this is how I want to position it as a productivity improvement, the ability to do more with less, during a time period that the company may need it that much more. So, but it's that kind of nuanced discussion that you'll start to pick up on and allows you to frame your project or whatever that kind of thing that you're looking for approval on. It'll help you kind of understand. Also helps you kind of tailor the message to the company, because you may want to be able to say within your internal communications, well, I've heard that we're really growing, but I'm not seeing that much in our dialogue that we're discussing. Should we be discussing that more? So
there's a lot of benefits to getting the lay of the land first.
Exactly.
And then what I'm hearing you say is there's power in the process.
Correct.
Because not only are you getting to know who does what, but within those initial discussions, it unearths where the financial pulse of the company is to give you insight into not only your own project, but what should we be communicating out to the employees, and does all that match?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And the other neat part too is you'll also start to pick up how the approval process just in general works within your company, right? So some companies have a very specific and structured budgetary process, right? There's a budget season, there's a capital budget part, there are templates that are specifically used within that. Others are more informal and maybe less budget heavy, but you'll be able to pick up on that with just kind of those initial first discussions, because that's the really important part is, hey, if I know what that structure is, if there's a timetable, if there's a template, if there's even, certain thresholds for projects, dollar figure thresholds and other things, you can at least start to glean that long before you ever are actually trying to do that.
So among, again, my IC Pro friends, there's this saying called the seat at the table.
Yeah.
And not everyone, but they say we're never invited to the seat at the table. And so if the company growth goals and where we are and all this insider information is talked in a room that they're not a part of, then how do they go about finding out that information? Is it dependent on the culture of the company, and you need to get on a golf course or go to the bourbon bar of the company? By the way, this company has a bourbon bar for their employees.
I wish we used it as much as one would think, but yeah,
but you're working so hard. Yeah, we got to calculate the ROI on that. But how would I do that if I'm not there? And how does my team figure all that out?
Well, there's a really easy step on that. The very first part is, if it's a publicly traded company, every quarter you're going to have a analyst call, right? And you just kind of look out there, and that's really a call where the quarterly financial statements are reviewed typically it's the CEO. It'll be also the CFO, as well as maybe some other portions of management on that call. Okay. And they'll be fielding calls from investor analysts across the nation that cover that stock. And oftentimes that call can make news, or at bare minimum, at least influences the stock price. But it's really kind of a good back and forth discussion on, hey, look, here's everything we're seeing. And you'll actually hear the CEO and the CFO discuss some of those items with their own voice and their own perspective on that. So it's a great way for 1 hour every 90 days to just listen in and see exactly what the state of your company's financials are, right? And you actually get to hear a little bit of the perspective right from the CEO and right from the CFO. So publicly traded companies, if you're not at the table and you're just trying to figure out the lay of the land financially, that's a great place to start. So just look out there for the quarterly earnings release, and then there'll be an investor call or an analyst call somewhere on there, and just dial in. It's a little intimidating because you're afraid, like all of a sudden when you put your number in, who is calling? Who is this on the line? And your fear would be like, oh, like I'm going to be like, Sarah, what's your question for the CEO? And,
Nothing.
But that never happened. So but that's a little bit of an intimidation. And also they have audio playbacks too. So so you go to your company's website and you can actually listen to the Kate audio playback on that. If you're not in a publicly traded company, right, then it becomes a little bit trickier, right? Because there's in privately held, we don't have really any kind of set financial reporting that we have to do for the outside world beyond maybe there's some regulatory things. but beyond tax returns. So really, it's for the management team and it's for the ownership of the company. So that becomes a little bit trickier. But most organizations that I've been in, we're still sharing the information with the other management teams that are pertinent to their roles and responsibilities, being at the store level or at the regional bank level. Hey, this is this branch's financial performance, or when I was at market research firms, and okay, this is this division's numbers. So there's an ebb and a flow in the discussion around the financials happening just in general throughout an organization, even when we're talking about privately held companies. And part of it is, okay, then you just try to figure out, okay, how do I start to get in the loop of those communications? Maybe you start at the lower level, being at a divisional or at a individual manager level. Oh, hey, how do you get your financials? Hey, how do I get is there something that you guys can provide me? And sometimes it might even be informal, just sitting down at the table with your CFO, asking about it, right?
So then what do I say? So I'm looking for language.
Yeah.
So would I say, hey, the intent is just for our team to learn about your team and what you do and make it general? Or what would be some questions that I would ask the CFO? How do I go about doing that?
Yeah, I think one of the ways you can do it is you can say to yourself, okay, hey, look, maybe the first is just an introduction with, hey, I'm trying to get kind of piped in or looped into the financial discussions at a level that'd be appropriate for what we're trying to do, right?
Okay,
and
that's good.
And the question just becomes, okay, what is appropriate? Hey, do we want to share, hey, the successes that we've had, or what are maybe some operational challenges that we really need all the employees to be thinking about? Right? Hey, how do we improve productivity, or how do we really improve customer satisfaction? And those are things that, hey, your finance team, your CFO, and maybe the CEO also want that promoted. Hey, that's a great idea. And how do we start to partner with some portions of that financial information that also makes its way back to your internal communication? So
okay, that's good. So give first, learn what they're dealing with first,
exactly,
and establish that rapport in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that would have the team perceive us in a certain way, so it kind of lays a nice groundwork before we take the next step.
You got it. And the other thing is remind them the value that you bring, right? We have an opportunity to communicate both authentically. We have an opportunity to communicate creatively, maybe because you CFOs sometimes aren't the most creative people in the world. No offense. But and hey, how can we help you communicate your message? What are the messages that you all are looking to communicate within the financial side of things, within maybe operational focus that we need to help drive financial results? So, there's some real value that the internal comms pros can bring to the finance side. So don't forget the idea that, you may actually have an answer that the CFO of the finance team needs too.
Circle is a proud member of the Internal Comms Pro Collective and sponsor of this podcast. Circle's Insights feature gives you the data you need to demonstrate the value of your work and impact of each specific communication. Let Circle help you show your true impact on the bottom line. Request a demo at circle.com. That's CERKL.com.
My conversation with Jay was going so well, I could feel my confidence starting to rise as I gathered the steps needed to enhance professional credibility with the finance department. And I'm so glad I asked. Did you hear that polish he gave me on how to start a conversation with your CFO? I'm trying to get piped in to the financial decisions at a level that would be appropriate for what we're trying to do. I love that. As internal communicators, we love words. So I asked Jay for more words and terms that we should know. Let's listen to the second half of our conversation. And it gets really good because Jay helps me remove the barriers to entry of the finance department with some new terms. Okay, that's so good. All right, so we're there. We've got our credibility. We've got our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
What are there... Not that we're going to go through a big, long list of vocabulary words, but are there some key terms that at the very least we should know?
Yeah.
Like I know when we talked before, you had mentioned hurdle rate, and I had never heard that term. Yeah. So are there some key words or key questions that we should just kind of have at the tip of our tongue?
Yeah.
ready to ask about.
Well, we already talked about ROI, return on investment, or return, right? So we've demystified that little one. And we in finance like to use some funky little words that make us look smarter than we are, right? So we just kind of understand that. But, so if we think about that, we also think about there's a term that some people may call internal rate of return, or IRR, right? It's nothing different than, much like we already discussed, it's just measuring both the positive cash flows that we said, hey, 25,000, and also the negative cash flow. And then we just kind of come up with, all right, when we add those across multiple years, what does the internal rate of return on an annualized basis look like? So it's a little bit more in-depth financial calculation, but the beauty is your friends at Excel have actually made it to where you just basically type in equal IRR, and then you highlight the area too. And you can look like a genius, like, well, my IRR is, so.
Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Exactly.
I'm so excited.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
other hacks.
Thank you, Microsoft. Yeah. So understand that, okay, folks may use IRR simultaneously with return on investment. They're just two different methods by which projects are managed or measured. And then you can also have within an IRR or even a return on investment, there may be a hurdle rate, which is a rate that the company says, hey, my capital is worth this, or I need to get a return on projects above this, or else we really don't make money because we have too many other opportunities that can get us that amount of return. Or, hey, that's how much, when we go out and try to acquire funds to fund these projects, that's kind of how much it costs. So we know that anything below what we call the hurdle rate, or we may call it the discount rate, anything below that we know that really doesn't add benefit to the finances of the company. So we use these terms, and they're really not meant to kind of keep people at bay or try to make it mystical on the accounting and finance side. But unfortunately, they are kind of really industry specific, and sometimes they can serve as a barrier to entry as far as people being able to understand, hey, what is the real value of their projects? So hopefully in those terms, you at least kind of get a little bit more familiarity. And here's the beauty, YouTube, like Google, what is IRR?
Yeah.
And you will find a lot of good things. I mean,
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that this, like, we're removing the barriers.
Yes.
So that, because I think it is an issue of confidence.
Yeah, and I think the trick when we're looking at this is just the idea that all of a sudden I can maybe miscalculate something and lose a lot of my credibility because maybe I interpreted something wrong, or maybe I didn't understand. So here's an easy example, right? We said that when we added up the 25,000, that's 125,000. So I could accidentally say, I'm going to get a 125% return on this investment. And somebody would say, oh my gosh, you're going to more than double my investment plus 25%. And it's like, no, I did. So there's some issues that you can have when you don't fully understand the calculations, or aren't sure exactly how to piece those together, that you can lose a little bit of that credibility. Somebody says, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about. I guess the most important part is if you can find a confidant within the finance part, or even another member of your own team that has had some of that experience to help you look at that and other things, then it does kind of demystify that, as well as also creates kind of a check on it that you don't have a simple calculation issue.
So if you're worried about your calculations, there's a free Excel calculation worksheet we've set up for you. We'll be that confidant to help make sure your numbers are accurate. Just jump over to our website at internalcommspro.com and check out our free resource library. It's all there. So let's jump back into my conversation with Jay. On this next part, we talk about times when it might not always be appropriate to go down the big old calculation road, as you could be tying yourself up in mathematical knots for no reason. I get the calculation. The percentage of my project needs to be higher than the percentage of the hurdle rate?
You got it, yeah.
Okay.
And think about the hurdle rate as just being, hey, look, that is the fence post I have to jump over to get into the stable of what the projects are, right? And some companies have a really hard to find hurdle rate. Some companies just kind of know in general, oh shoot, well that's not enough of a return to warrant our capital outlay.
Okay.
And here's the other thing I will throw out: not all projects are created equal. You may think that your project has to kind of conform to some very hard budgeting timeline, but your project may not be of a financial size that warrants a very formal budgetary process and a very formal return on investment calculation. So here's an easy example. If I already have a let's say I already have an intranet, and my intranet's already costing $100,000. And really we're talking about just kind of upgrading or changing the provider, and it's going to be now $125,000 a year. Now I just have to justify, okay, how am I capturing that extra $25,000?
Okay.
Or another easy way is, hey, I'm transferring that, and it's actually going to be $90,000. If you come up to your CFO and say, hey, I want to change this, and it's going to save you $10,000, he's probably going to say, sold.
Right.
How do we do it today?
Yeah.
So understand that every project doesn't have to mean that it's this long, defined return on investment calculation. And that's, I think, the other important part on having those discussions with your finance team is find out what that kind of decision process looks like.
Okay.
Is it dollar figure related? Okay, decisions along this dollar figure are more like just managerial approval, or is it okay? Hey, decisions at this level really more like a project capital investment. Okay, that's a much higher level of scrutiny, and that's where we start to get into these calculations on return and things like that.
So find out what's appropriate.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You might create a lot of work for yourself, and they're like, "Is it going to save 10,000? Yeah, okay, go off you go," and then you're off to the races.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you twisted yourself in knots on all these financial calculations that this guy Jay told you to do, and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, I hate that CFO."
Okay.
So and I think that's the trick. Don't create your own prison in the process, right? In essence, try to figure out what is the process, right, and trust in it, in the idea that okay, if my project already shows that it saves the company money net without any outlay, it's just literally switching vendors or it's moving to a different platform. Now all of a sudden that becomes a really easy sell. And how do I just demonstrate that in a very quick and easy way, right?
Okay.
And then the more complicated that is, or the longer the payback period, when we think about payback, hey, how long does it take for me to make back my investment? If you ever hear that term payback period, it's really talking about how many years does it take for me to recoup that investment that we made. So the longer that is, then the more we have to start getting into more detailed financial calculations.
I do hope all this math hasn't put you to sleep, because we're now getting to one of the most important parts of the conversation. You really want to lean in and listen here, because this next insight is an insight that CFOs never quite talk about.
One thing that we did talk about, if you don't mind me jumping in, is one of the things that we talk about is we in finance don't like to argue to the right of the equal sign, right? Yeah. So what that means is just the idea of anything to the right of the equal sign is just mathematics. So assuming that your calculator in Excel works, right? We're not going to argue the mathematics. What we really want to do is start to have the visibility into the calculations that you're making, right? So when we think about that is, as you're preparing your budgets and you're preparing, your project plans, what we're really wanting to see is, okay, how did you come up with those kind of benefits, right? How did you come up with the outlays? And also, how did you come up with, here's my projected benefits on each one of these? And if you can really add some quantitative measurements to your qualitative, the good news that you have, or the warm and fuzzy reasons why this is going to move the business forward, if you can actually help quantify those kind of benefits to the investment that we're making, all of a sudden that really makes it pretty easy to justify, whatever number that we're showing on your project calculations.
So say that again. A CFO never argues
to the right of the equal sign, right?
That is so good.
So once again, much like every other thing, hey, when we're looking at your return on investment, do we believe that the initial investment is correct? Mm-hmm. Here's the quote that I have from this vendor to do this project, and here's the cost. Okay, great. Then do we think, hey, is your return or the net good guys, positive impacts of this investment, are those substantiated in truth? And we'll say, okay, well, and how you quantify that really becomes more of a case of, okay, can you get the data points needed to turn what is a qualitative factor, improved employee engagement, or better customer satisfaction, or longer employee retention, qualitative measurements, can you turn that into a quantitative by saying, no, I think improved employee engagement generates a 10% improvement in overall worker productivity, and on an average employee's wages, that 10% means X dollars more efficiency at the company. And you can actually turn what is a qualitative measurement. Once again, think about that equation that you're making. You're turning that into an actual number.
Okay, so then that would mean that my relationship building skills that I used with the finance, I'm going to do the same thing with HR because I need those numbers with HR.
Correct.
And I need those numbers with IT.
Correct.
So we just did an episode with Natalie Guzman, again from Fifth Third Bank, and she talked about that was her trifecta.
Yeah, I think anytime that you can have allies across the organization, the finance team doesn't want to get in front of or be a barrier to a really well thought out project that, number one, can show that it's financially viable, but number two, has cross-sectional support, right? When we think about it, it's really like, wow, this is the alignment of both internal communications along with HR, along with IT. So I know that IT believes that the IT infrastructure of the project is viable. Great. I know that HR believes that yes, the employee benefit from this internal communication is actually accurate and meaningful, right? And then I know internal communications is going to be driving this project. It's got the buy-in of all three of those. And then we can start to look at, IT has vetted that the project cost is going to be correct. Great. Okay, HR has vetted that the, let's call it the employee efficiency or employee turnover numbers, and created a quantitative measurement of that. Hey, that number is actually founded in real data, right? It's founded in real payroll data or founded in real employee turnover statistics, and therefore we can actually kind of rely on that number, right? To the left of the equal sign, we can then start to rely on those individual variables so that we're really not arguing to the right of the equal sign on the final product.
The Internal Comms Pro podcast is proudly sponsored by Circle. Circle provides you with the data and analytics you need to make impactful decisions for your organization. With Circle's Insights feature, you can track measurements and the engagement of each location, division, or even employee. Easily create and share reports with stakeholders to show the true value of your internal comms. Visit circle.com, that's CERKL.com, to schedule your demo today.
So I'm getting ready to wrap up my conversation with Jay, and I uncovered just a few more key insights you don't want to miss here. I uncovered why your CFO isn't emotionally invested in your project. I found out how to put your projects on a similar footing during the budgeting process. I also uncovered what your CFO is really thinking when you bring in that slick vendor sales sheet on the software you want to purchase, and what your CFO really wish you would have done instead. And the biggest aha moment of the day, and what made it worth trucking in the snow and up to the third floor for, I finally figured out the sheer amount of value we as internal communicators are leaving on the table. You really want to lean in and listen here because you do not want to miss these last few insights.
If you just want to kind of shrink down the budget process of any, and this is a formal, larger companies have a more formalized budgeting process. But typically what happens is during the budget process, we talked about, we in the finance team are trying to allocate, finite resources to an infinite amount of possibilities. So normally what happens is we add up the first iteration of all the budgets and they don't come anywhere near what the company's expected growth rate or even what we've done in the past, right? It's just kind of, and everybody then goes back for iteration 2 and 3 and everything gets more realistic in everybody's submissions. But during that period, you'll have really well built projects that are almost like, I talk about it, cakes that are fully baked, they have the icing, they're beautiful, right? And we'll have like 7 of those beautiful projects, fully baked cakes on the table that we still have to cut down to 5, right? But they're beautiful. But then somebody will inevitably come in with a sack of flour, a sack of sugar, and some sprinkles and say, hey, look, I need your help to bake this cake. Here's all the ingredients. Will you do this for me? And can the project get approved? Well, as we're looking out there, we're thinking to ourselves, hey, okay, I'm going to make the quickest cake on this possible because this isn't my cake. I don't have I'm not emotionally invested. I'm not leading this project, so maybe I don't understand all the qualitative features of that and all the reasons why it's important. And on top of that is you, the person who is promoting this project, you've really come in with only partial work done. So you're really leaving it to the finance team to really discern what that's all about. So instead, what's typically going to happen is we're going to grab it. We're going to say, okay, well, that's your cake. That's really nice. Here's some flour and sugar. Or here's out of the 7 beautiful cakes we have, here's the 5 that we're going to go with. So the real thought is, don't do yourself a disservice and your project a disservice by not having done, the proper level of work and kind of pre-planning that's required to put your project on a similar footing as an operational project or as an expansion project or other things like that. So I just think that if you kind of understand that finance's job during that kind of budgetary cycle is going to be thinning the herd down for what only we have the resources to be able to, efficiently attack during that year that we're budgeting or planning out, then you can understand, well, shoot, I had better make sure that my work product is at or above the level of the other ones that are competing for those resources. So,
and the cake isn't necessarily on a slick marketing slick,
no.
Right? It can be in a spreadsheet with accurate numbers. Talk about that sometimes. Where I know we mentioned, that we come in with this beautiful presentation. And where it implodes is now you're looking at the accuracy of that.
Yeah.
So share a little bit into that insight.
Well, one of the things that we'll see sometimes, and this is we'll see basically, here's the sales brochure given to, that person, some department from the department straight to finance. Hey, I want to do that. Well, that's great. We have one side of what it's supposed to do, right? From the external side, which is this is the cost and here's how you, but we really haven't tied it into, okay, but how do we then function differently as an organization if we do all of this, right? So the next step is Lily tying that back into, okay, here's what the cost of this is, and visually you can see what it's supposed to do, but here's what's going to change day one after it's fully implemented, and this is how the company is going to be more profitable, more efficient, more whatever, and this is the economic kind of results from that, right? And so what happens is we're one-sided on, hey, here's a great sales presentation, but I didn't do the work to say what is different. One of the things I always say, just to think about, is, all right, we hit the Staples Easy button and it's fully implemented exactly like me as the employee. What do I do differently tomorrow when I log into work, and how does that change my life as an employee, right? Maybe a small amount, maybe a large amount, maybe only a section of the employees, but you really want to be able to kind of say that, because then we can start to quantify what those differences and how we make that money back from that initial investment. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think this is the part where the internal communicator leaves their value on the table, because if the fact of the matter is, if I save that employee even 10 minutes every week, because they are now more efficient in finding the information they need, they're not taking that 10 minutes and multiplying it by their average wage. And those are huge dollars, and they leave it on the table.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest part that kind of our internal communicators maybe don't understand the impact of their work. And I don't mean that from a standpoint. I just think sometimes we can think, oh, we're back office, so therefore we don't add value. We're a cost center. And that's an old kind of trite narrative, right? And hopefully that's dying out. I think the trick for internal communicators is to be able to say, okay, how do we start to create real economic data around those X factors, right? And the trick is, here's the one thing I would tell you is, when in doubt, create the data point, then maybe shrink it in half, right? Say, look, hey, this is how I think, but even if I only get 50% of that, productivity saving, or only, hey, I think it'll save you 15 minutes, but okay, I'll settle for 5 minutes a day across the whole organization. They're more productive. That's still X dollars, or whatever that is. So if you can err on the side of conservatism and it still makes sense, and then you say, but here's where we think. And don't forget, it doesn't always have to be your own data. You can show, hey, Harvard Business Study says that, an engaged employee is 15% more productive than their average peer next to each other. Okay. And I'm making that up.
Right.
Your Harvard Business probably has a bigger number than that, but the accountant in me said, ooh, yeah. So
it's okay to cite outside numbers if you can't get it.
Correct.
I think that's good, even to in your relaying that conservative, like, hey, we know it's 15, but we're going to be conservative and say it's 5. That even, I think, gives the CEO a soundbite.
Correct.
So all of this is strategic in that it is laying out the story for the CFO to get his or her head around it, but also at the same time get your project approved.
Exactly. And I think ultimately that's what you want, because one of the things that at least sets off a alarm bell for me as CFO is if the project makes sense, only if everybody does 100% of what the best case scenario is. And I always come back to, when has any organization ever done 100% of every facet of any project and when has external forces never somehow been slightly different than we anticipated, right?
So do they need to factor in like a risk something calculation, or how does that work?
Or at least understand that there should be at least a little bit of spread between, and that's when we talk about conservatism in our numbers, right?
Okay.
That's kind of one of those things where we say, okay, hey, I think I'm going to generate a $25,000 net benefit in productivity, but this project still makes sense if only I do $10,000 net productivity or $20,000 net productivity, right? Because maybe we say, hey, you know what, we think our best estimate is $25,000 annually. We're going to save you over this 5-year period. But even if not, even if we only get 20,000, guess what? That still turns around a 20% ROI versus 25.
Okay.
That's still above the target or the hurdle rate that you all are looking for. So you start to kind of figure out, okay, it doesn't always have to be best case. What is, if I use conservative numbers, hey, do I still get there to a spot where, that achieves finance's approval?
So is there a industry term on that risk? So for example, if we have an intranet, we've launched 5 of them, we know the software works, we're pretty clear on this. Or on the flip side, we've never done this.
Yeah.
So is it like a 50% risk or a 10% risk? Is it a percentage? Like, mathematically, how am I calculating that risk?
Yeah, mathematically, I think what you want to do is you don't want to apply so much theoretical risk that you implode your project, right? But you also want to say, okay, even if project cost, we gave ourselves a 10% cushion, or we gave ourselves a 15% cushion. Okay. So that project costs could escalate in the idea of implementation. Or, you know what, we took our estimates of productivity improvements or employee engagement and the dollar figures and we actually took those down by 10 to 15% because we really wanted to make sure that, hey, look, it's an achievable target that we feel comfortable making, right? And I've talked with HR and they feel really good that, hey, that their goal number is going to be X, but the target number that makes this project work is actually lower than that. And that's the kind of thinking that tells the CFO, great, okay, not this project looks great on its face, but hey, look, there's also some upside that we're probably not capturing because they gave me, the most realistic and sometimes even conservative estimate.
So that's a cake that's digestible to the CFO's safety and security.
That's a cake like you like have layered in, raspberry chocolate chip ice cream. Yeah, that's what that cake is. Yeah.
So we know I like that. I like to make sure that as we're communicating this, we know the audience well enough to bake in safety and security, and we've thought through that. Yeah. And that makes it again more digestible.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so this is so good, by the way.
Wonderful, yeah. It's been a lot of fun. So,
Jay, I can't thank you enough for opening your doors. Yeah. So if you could boil this down to one thing, what would be the one thing that every internal communicator should know about their CFO?
Yeah. Well, once again, I think you come back to that kind of principle that we talk about, and we talk about it also here within our accounting and finance team, which is, hey, we're not going to argue to the right of the equal sign, right? And that's not just kind of a soundbite. That really is think in terms of a calculation and your return on investment. We're not really going to argue your return on investment. We're going to want to see, hey, what are the components in that calculation, right? We want to see the individual, almost like show your work, right? So show the components of your calculations and think really through what my investment is. That's sometimes the easy part, right? But really don't underestimate the value you bring as an internal communicator to shape and change kind of the way that the organization works and actually drives its profitability. So think about those other components within that calculation that you can either quantify yourself or through partnership with IT and HR can quantify those benefits. Because really, ultimately, as long as you, the internal communicator, aren't underestimating the value you're bringing and saying, oh, well, you can't measure it. If you kind of challenge that logic, I think you're going to find that a lot of people will be able to say, yeah, no, there is real quantitative benefit that we can calculate that can actually generate a return on the investment. So,
well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Internal Comms Pro podcast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Hard Fought Victory by Purple Planet Music. Thank you for listening.